It's going to expand to the entire planet. I mean, it just is happening right now. I didn't share with you in the earlier part, I thought, but let me just share with you. There are scientists today, one of them particular I will quote, Johann Rockström from the Potsdam Institute in Berlin, where he is the director of it. And he and some other scientists have proffered that we could well be at or past all or some of 5 tipping points right now. Those 5 tipping points are: number 1, the coral reefs; number 2, the Barents Sea ice; number 3, the permafrost, which is particularly concerning to military operations, because as permafrost thaws in various places, the land begins to move and disrupt, runways, airports, various facilities, buildings are cracking. You can go up in the northern part of Russia and other places and see the effects. But the greater damage is the release of methane in massive amounts. And methane is 20 to 80 times more destructive than CO2. So this release of methane that's occurring because of the permafrost thawing, who reverses the permafrost thaw? We don't know how. We don't have the power to do that. So that's a tipping point. That is something that you may find is irreversible. But the 2 most compelling are the Arctic and the Antarctic.
Yeah.
Now, I went up to the Arctic and the Antarctic as Secretary of State, visited both, listened to the scientists, stood on the ice sheet of the Arctic, watching a torrential river flowing underneath the ice out into the ocean of the melting ice. It was 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic last summer. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic. And you can see the disruption in the ice sheet just visibly as you fly over it. And vast amounts of it have been breaking off and going out to sea and melting. I saw one fjord where the calving of 86 million metric tons of ice falls each day, calving into the ocean and then going out to melt. We are seeing a higher rate of sea level rise than was predicted earlier. And if the entire ice sheet over the next century and a half, a long period of time, obviously, but within the lifetime of some people, born now today, you can see levels of disruption that are coming at us. We have no ability to do anything to except adapt or build resilience. So, that 86 million metric tons, folks, is enough water on a daily basis floating out into the ocean to supply the greater New York region, the greater Connecticut region, the greater New Jersey region, a lot of people with their water needs for an entire year.
So it sounds very much as if we can see the most severe impacts in perhaps the hottest, warmest places in the world at present, Africa. And we can see the initial effects of climate change in the colder, but the impacts in terms of the strategic environment is going to impact across the whole world. I mean, there is no corner of the world that will be safe.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I'll just build on it slightly. In sub-Saharan Africa, you have 48 nation states that produce 0.55% of all the emissions of the world. 18 of the 25 most impacted places in the world are in Africa. So that's where you're going to have a massive impact. The entire food production capacity is at risk. It hasn't happened. It's not happening tomorrow, but is at risk of imploding. And then you will have literally tens of millions of people on the move, banging on the door of Europe or banging on some door where they think they get in and have a better life. In addition, there are 20 countries, UK and US among them, that are responsible for about 76% of all the emissions. So that's really where we have to get it right. Those 20 countries need to step up, because unless they do, the rest of the world is really going to be suffering the consequences. And I think it's going to be an extraordinarily disruptive global community at that point in time.
Well, you mentioned, of course, the impact of food and grain on the most vulnerable countries already, and perhaps we've seen a foreshadowing of that already with the Ukrainian war and the supply of grain to African countries. I mean, is that the sort of thing that you could expect to see more of?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question about it. Yesterday, on the front page of the New York Times, there was a big photograph above the fold of the Mekong Delta with huge expanse of rice paddies, and the rice crop is threatened there. It's threatened in South Asia. It's threatened in India. I mean, and that's a staple of food for billions of people. So that is at risk. It's happening now, and it's partly happening because of the warming and the increased acidification. It's also happening because of irresponsible damming. The building of dams on the Mekong River all the way from China down through Laos, Cambodia, has been just out of any realm of reasonableness without regard to downstream impacts. And of course, the Mekong Delta is the final downstream destination.
Thank you. Okay, Secretary Kenny, can I just focus on one? You mentioned 18 countries. Is one of those that you're concerned of in Africa, Sudan? I ask this simply because this is a very live situation here. I just recall that you and I first met, I think, when we tried to put the fire out in Yemen. And there are so many patches of the world where the West has sort of wandered into: Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, and so forth. Sudan seems to be a live example of where we could be doing a lot more to assist in stabilizing that country before things got out of control. But the addition of climate change and what's happening in that country is going to really compound the challenges there if we don't lean into it.
It will compound, Mr. Chairman, but I think more, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, that entire area, the Horn of Africa is going to, as a whole, be enormously impacted, but also the Sahel. And these are places that will be greatly affected. As I said, we're losing, there are 10 million people a year who die from extreme heat. And we're witnessing places now, right now, yesterday, the last few days in India, they're massive. There are millions of people sleeping outdoors in hopes of getting through the heat, because it's 30 degrees centigrade at nighttime. And we're seeing unheard of temperatures during the day. So this is happening faster than a lot of people anticipated. And I think that's something we really need to take note of. And last summer in Europe, I think the Rhine River was down to inches in some places. We at Lake Powell and Lake Mead, which feed the Hoover Dam electricity plant, was at record low levels. It's insufficient to produce the electricity. Water was insufficiently cool. It was too hot in France, so it wasn't able to cool the nuclear plants. I mean, you can start a long list of the impacts that are occurring today, which many scientists will tell you are bigger and faster in their happening than had been predicted.
So is it also fair to say that good governance, wise security, or utility of the armed forces is going to be challenged in these countries where dictators or authoritarian states will be taking ever more extreme measures to look after themselves, to stay in power, rather than being able to handle these threats perhaps wisely and cognitively?
Mr. Chairman, history is full of so-called leaders who find people and places to blame for their inability to be able to provide for their people, or willingness to provide for their people. And that is why it is a threat. That's why the climate crisis is a threat multiplier. There was a book written a number of years ago, I think it's called Water Wars. And it lays out the case for which, and already you have conflict. I mean, you have tribes fighting over wells in various parts of the world. And as the water patterns change significantly, leaders will fight to provide for their people, and may even, they have historically fought over various water bodies. I wouldn't eliminate that as one of the risks that we face if we don't respond adequately.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's now turn to Ukraine and perhaps what's happening there as to how the battle over food and oil supplies, things like that, is impacting there. Robert, do you want to take that forward?
Yes, Chair. I mean, we've mentioned Ukraine briefly already, Secretary, just in terms of the context of grain supply, and I'm particularly concerned about the security implications that we'll see, not just from climate and then from the trade conflict that comes after that. I mean, I wondered as well whether I could ask you about China and how we approach China, because this is clearly a key country that we've got to engage with in terms of reducing global emissions, but there's also massive strategic importance that they have there in terms of exporting, capturing, processing vital materials, including things that go into ours and your fighter aircraft.
Right. Come in.
Yes, China
You done it, that one.
is critical to any solution, because China today is about 30% and growing, not quite 30% yet, but growing in the percentage of emissions of the world. An example, I mean, China's nearing 30%, we're around 10% and declining. And the EU as a whole is somewhere around, I don't know, 7% or somewhere around there. But, and obviously you're no longer in the EU, but I don't know precisely, alone your emissions don't reach the levels of those other countries. So China, even as it is building new coal plants, is also deploying more renewable capacity than any other country in the world. China is also the largest manufacturer of that capacity than any place in the world. And so that's why China looms so large on both sides of this, because we do need China to be at the table and working in a cooperative way with us, and we need to work cooperatively with China. We've got to find a way to deal with the climate crisis and separate it from the other issues, which are obviously issues of enormous concern to many people in the world. And there are a lot of them. It's not just some tiny little list. There's a list of items which, from nuclear weapons to cyber warfare and cyber theft and the economy, and you can run through the long list. That's not a challenge here. The problem is that right now there has not been, for a period of time, there hasn't been the level of communication that we had previously as we worked with China on this. My hopes are, I know President Biden is very much hopeful that there could be some thawing in the relationship. He's working at it. It's our hope that sometime in the next weeks, there'll be able to be some discussions that could begin to move us in a better direction. But bottom line, I mentioned 20 countries. At the top of the list of those 20 countries are China, the United States, Russia, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, a group of countries that have big economies and that are also major emitters. No country can solve this problem by itself. That is why we've had 27 meetings of the Conference of the Parties under the UN process. And that's why we're going to have the 28th in December in Dubai, in the UAE. And our hope is that this one could go further than we've gone previously in pinning down the level of ambition we need for mitigation, because you can't adapt your way out of this crisis. You've got to reduce the emissions. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned earlier the longevity issue here. These emissions stay active in the atmosphere until you take them out and do something with them. That requires direct capture. And right now we don't have we have the technology, but it's massive, it's very expensive, and bringing it to scale is exceedingly difficult. And even if we got to net zero by 2050, we still have to suck $1.6 trillion or so trillion tons, excuse me, of CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Okay.
So we face a monumental challenge here because the damage continues to be done no matter what.
Okay.
Again, I think we have the ability, Mr. Chairman, if we apply ourselves and bring ourselves together in consortia and begin to work more intensively, that's our best shot at being able to do what we need to do.
Thank you for that. Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I think you're fairly indicating that President Biden has the aspiration of thawing relations and encouraging movement, particularly with China. You know that this is a global quest, but not all are equally committed to it. So what more do you believe the United States or ourselves or other developed nations can do to deal with the resentment that abounds in many of the countries that you have indicated within that top 20, who look on at the developed West with a level of resentment and say, well, you boys for generations have benefited from using fossil fuels and you've grown economically, and some of the other countries within that 20 are saying, we just want our opportunity to do that as well and are not as invested in the challenges associated with ever-increasing temperature. Do you have a plan, rather than just thawing relations, to incentivize those countries to make that significant difference?
Well, the best incentive of all is the fact that if we don't do it, every country in the world is going to be equally impacted, significantly impacted in existential ways. And if existential choices don't motivate you, I'm not sure anything will. But the reality is that it's really important to have a fact-based conversation here. Yes, Great Britain began the Industrial Revolution, the United States picked it up, and certainly Europe and some other countries throughout the 1900s developed their economies and went merrily along their way, filling the atmosphere with these fumes. And only a couple of times during that period of time did some visionary people venture to suggest that this could be a very damaging process. The Swedish scientist Arrhenius in the late 1800s suggested it. In more modern times, Rachel Carson wrote about the potential damage being done, some others. But it really wasn't until 1988 when Jim Hansen, a NASA scientist, testified before the US Congress that the climate crisis is happening. It's here. It's with us now. That's when governments on a global basis began to concentrate and focus. And in 1992, we all came together in Rio and we passed an agreement, which was voluntary, that we were going to address emissions in the climate crisis. Since then, we've had 27 meetings of those parties, the 28th coming now, and we have yet to pull the world together in an organized fashion that's really guaranteed to get the job done. And even during those years, my friends, during those years of the, from the warning on, a lot of other countries have gone out and willfully used coal because that's all they had. So the truth is that, all of those largest countries have been responsible for doing things to their own climate and to the climate of the planet as a result of the ways they have chosen to propel their vehicles, heat their homes, light their factories and businesses, and so forth. That's where it is. And you're not going to gain anything here by pointing fingers saying, well, you guys started in the 1800s. Yeah, but you can measure all of the emissions between 98 and 1900 and 1988, and they pale compared to the emissions that have been going up into the atmosphere from 1992 till now during the time we had an agreement to supposedly do something about this. So I think that we've got to stop finger pointing and pull together. Countries that can do more need to do more. Countries that have an economy that can put money into this effort need to put money into the effort. People who have the technologies need to deploy them and come together and further develop technologies that are going to save us from ourselves.
Thank you, Gavin. Can I just probe that Gavin's question a bit further? Because I think it's very interesting to recognize that how much of the relationship or the poor relationship between the world's two superpowers perhaps is playing. You spoke about the importance of cooperation, but ultimately the relationships between the United States and China are not good. I mean, that came out when that balloon went down in February, the Chinese balloon. It was reported that there were no back channels with China. Arguably, sir, you are the best communicator with China. You go there on a regular basis with a very different agenda than most others are visiting Taiwan or speaking with authority because of China's military aggression, its growth, its assertion, its One Belt, One Road programs. My question is, how much is this distorting our ability to nurture the type of relationship that we need to persuade China? Because I've heard this before, what Gavin has said, that Britain poisoned the world, we had our industrial revolution, it's now Chinese times. And their timelines are very different to ours. They're saying 2060, 2070 is when they'll start to really move into proper carbon neutral place. And of course, Russia is then playing on that, pivoting over to sell its oil and gas because there is no longer a Western market because of Ukraine. So you have Russia and China choosing a very different avenue. Surely China must recognize that they are going to be as damaged and affected as the rest of the world if we keep going down this road.
Well, look, President Biden made it very clear at the very beginning of his administration that the climate crisis was not like and shouldn't be treated like the other issues between the United States and the West and China. And for for a long period of time, we separated it. It was able to be separated, and we could go along a climate track, which we did fairly effectively with some agreements as to what we would do. But before we could implement those agreements, other things interfered and made it more complicated. I think President Biden very much wants to go forward. The Chinese, I've been talking with the Chinese by video conference in the last months. Regrettably, my counterpart, Xi Jinping, was sick for a period of time. He's much better now, and we are engaged in conversations. And he has told me that the Chinese now believe that it's important for them to separate the climate crisis from the other issues. So the other issues are the bailiwick of Secretary of State Blinken and the President and the White House. And I try to, keep moving along as well as we can here to get progress on the climate front. Because yes, China knows it's going to be impacted. That's why they're deploying an extraordinary amount of renewable energy right now, way more than the rest of the world put together. So China is currently, moving. We would obviously like them to do certain things that they haven't yet done. We've talked about those, whether it's methane or a faster transition. But that's what we have to talk about. Those are the kinds of things that are important to sit down and hash out. And President Biden wants us to be able to do that sooner rather than later. And that's what he's working towards.
The challenge, though, is for you, and is this something that you raise, that China's emissions are not coming down as fast as they should do. They are still building coal-fired power stations. So they're putting their own economy above the interests of the planet. How do we reconcile this? Because on the one side, they are making batteries. They're doing all those clean energy things and making turbines and so forth. But on the other side, they still are very much pursuing a China-first strategy.
Yes, they are, Mr. Chairman, and I think that there are many other countries in the world doing the same thing. And what we need to do is find the common interests and the ways in which we can actually work in a acceptable way in terms of cooperating to make certain things happen. That's what we agreed to do in Glasgow. We agreed that we were going to work on methane. China agreed to put together a methane plan. That plan was shown to us in Sharm el-Sheikh. They're working on the approval of it. It's one of the things we'd like to talk with them about. In addition, they also agreed that they would try to work with us to accelerate the transition off of coal. And I think there are many ways in which we could actually be helpful to each other in the exchange of information, in the ways in which we might even be able to cooperate on the ground to accelerate the reduction of emissions, which we all benefit from. So I think that what we need to do is find the things that we can mutually agree could make a difference to both of us without compromising other kinds of things that nations might not be willing to compromise.
All right.
So, I hope that can happen. I know, again, I say it, that President Biden is committed to trying to move us to a better place in that dialogue. But there are some tough issues, and they're on a completely different track from the climate track, which is where they ought to be.
Thank you, Secretary. Gavin again.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary, we've talked about some aspects of this impacting upon defence, including the potential for famine, mass migration, and a number of nation states maybe impacted by friction and tension between themselves. This question is, I guess, more particularly focused on defence and the impact of climate change, and would be interested in your assessment as to the impact of climate change and the operability of defence forces, armed forces, be it through extreme temperatures for personnel, extreme temperatures for the effective mobility of equipment and ships, mobility and so on, and then rising sea levels potentially impacting outposts and defence locations based overseas.
Well, a very important question. We are already seeing impacts in Norfolk, Virginia, for instance. They are making plans for how to deal with readiness in order to get the complement of a ship to be able to reach the ship in the event of emergency, where they may be cut off as a result of the rising sea level. I was briefed on this a number of years ago as secretary from the admiral in charge of the East Coast, who was talking about the readiness impacts that the climate crisis presents. Obviously, I just mentioned the permafrost changes and so forth. There are, the Department of Defense right now has said that each year here in the States, they are seeing the consequences of increasing incidents of flooding, drought, wildfires, extreme weather events on military installations here at home. And in 2019 alone, the Department of Defense assessed that climate-related impacts to 79 different installations in every geographic combatant command area of responsibility were present, and they see these threats as only increasing. So there are many other ways in which the footprint of a particular deployment will have an impact. And in 2021, the Director of National Intelligence released a new national intelligence estimate on climate change, which identified a list of countries of concern where analysts see overlapping fragility alongside climate vulnerability that would be worsening over the next decades. So this has now been integrated into the preparatory measures taken by our military and NATO and others in various places. And I will be doing an event in a few weeks in Brussels with Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Commission, and Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, the director, the director general, and this will be focused specifically on the impacts of climate with respect to security and the measures that we need to take to respond.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary, this, of course, climate change is a global issue, and we clearly going to have a global response, as you've touched on, quite rightly, of course, already today. What greater cooperation should we be doing between ourselves, US, UK, armed forces, and wider NATO to make sure we address these challenges at that larger level?
I think, sir, that there's a great deal of cooperation and communication. That's been forced, obviously, by Ukraine. And it'd be hard for me to, because I'm not following it on a day-to-day basis, not my lane, so to speak. I can't tell you all of the refined particulars of one change or another that might make a difference. I think Jens Stoltenberg clearly will share that with us when we have our meeting in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I think a simple principle: the more you can cooperate, the more you're sharing information, the more you are working together to augment capacity, the stronger you're going to be. And I've been personally deeply impressed by the way in which NATO has come together. I think President Biden has provided very important leadership from day one when he came in after a period of time where NATO had been denigrated and criticized and attacked and neglected by an administration, to now being a central, probably the strongest alliance and implemented alliance on the planet. And I think that is there more that can be done? Yes, but let's let Jens Stoltenberg fill in those blanks.
Thank you.
Secretary, you spoke earlier a little bit about food security and the challenges that presents. I just want to turn to a specific challenge, which I think I may have raised with you in person when we've met over the last couple of years since the Ukraine invasion, and that's the grain ships coming out of the port of Odessa. And are well aware how critical those grain ships are. We actually feel the consequence here in the UK because of the cost of living crisis, as it's called here, with food inflation. 1/5 of the grain is getting out, that's all. And as hardship increases in Africa because of climate change, should we not be doing more internationally to ensure that 5/5 of the grain is able to get out? There's grain which is now caught up in the silos. There's grain which is still yet to be taken from the farming fields and so forth. There's a massive backlog simply because the UN deal has been scribed by Russia. The bully has determined the conditions for which those grain ships can get out. Now, that was written at a time when it looked like Odessa may even fall, because that's the way the war was heading. Now you have national waters, international waters. Surely we could, perhaps through the UN General Assembly, turn Odessa into a humanitarian safe haven. This is needed for the Africa, but and indeed European food security too. Sorry, it's a long explanation, but is there not something more we could do to wrestle the control and the movement of the grain ships coming out of Ukraine?
Tobias, that obviously is a really central issue, which belongs in the United Nations and belongs in the Security Council, except that the Security Council obviously has been rendered, the weakness of it has been exposed as a consequence of the vetoes that have taken place and the lack of its capacity to summon what should be normally summoned here. In the absence of that, the General Assembly and other things are available tools. Food clearly should not be used as a weapon of war. Every declaration of decency that has come since World War II, when we began to organize ourselves around a different set of values and principles, which have worked pretty effectively, notwithstanding breaches here and there. And I think that I think more focus on Odessa, more focus on what might be the best way of protecting that channel. Might Odessa, I'm only putting the question back to you, might Odessa become a haven, protected, for the purpose of being able to make sure we distribute the food as was promised? I think that's an important principle to try to enforce. Again, it's not my job to be opining on which city or which location ought to become what in this war. That's for others. But as a matter of broad principle, the food as a weapon component of this, much like the fuel as a weapon, it's a very clear message to all of us. It also, if I just add parenthetically, quickly, the fuel issue is critical for everybody to take note of. Gas and gas elements have been using Ukraine to push very hard to say, well, we're the clean entity. We're going to be the transitional fuel, but transitional has a very funny time period attached to it, like 25, 30, and 40 years as facilities are built out with that kind of a long payout horizon. And obviously, unabated gas will become its own problem going forward unless there are hard standards put in place about what the emissions capture is going to need to be for that to take place. And so if you're replacing a coal plant or you're replacing an oil-based fired furnace of some kind or whatever, you are getting, and you're doing that with gas, you're getting a momentary reduction of 30 to 50% of emissions. But after a certain number of years, 20, 30 certainly, that's going to have to be held accountable. You're going to have to reduce those emissions. So food, gas, those basic necessities should not be used as weapons. And Germany has made the most pronounced policy statement of all by moving, completely away from it and suggesting there's an alternative future without it. It remains to be seen sort of how that plays out.
Secretary, thank you for that. Something I would like to pursue, I think we would like to. We visited Odessa, and the mayor of Odessa is very keen to do this. When I was in Kyiv only 3 or 4 weeks ago, again, it's something that they would like to pursue as well. I appreciate it's not necessarily directly in your remit. It's actually something I spoke with David Beasley about, and thank you for introducing us to him, the former head of the World Food Programme. He gave evidence to our committee, a very lively character, and thank you for that introduction. It was most welcome indeed. My final question is just relating, you have been cautiously optimistic. You've always caveated the concern of where 1.5 degrees is going, and saying we can do this, we can still do this, we can turn this around. But it does seem that we've had COP26, COP27, which seem to be less successful. We've got COP28, which you've referred to in Dubai. When do we really need to secure real change in the next couple of years? When is even your own optimism going to potentially run out, and we then need to face a real reality of fundamental seismic, climate change?
Well, I think we face that now. I mean, as I said, if you have 5 tipping points and 2 of them involve the potential of meters, literally multiple meters, double digits of meters of sea level rise, that's as good a definition of a catastrophe as you can achieve. And the reality is that is where we are headed unless we do more about it. Now, why do I have this measure of optimism and of our capacity? Because it is within our capacity. We have the technology necessary to achieve our 2030 goal. We're just not deploying it rapidly enough. And we're not building the supply chain rapidly enough to deploy it. But the fact is that if we did do that, we could meet the goal. And during that period of time, one of these other technologies may come online that completely changes the modeling and changes the equation. So, I believe in that possibility very deeply. I think that there's another reason I believe in it. When I started this job in 2021, we were headed towards 3 degrees, 3.7 degrees or so of warming. And because of what we did in Glasgow and because of what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, the IEA has told us that if all of the promises made in Glasgow and Sharm el-Sheikh are kept, if they're all kept, we would be at 1.8 degrees of warming by 2050 out of Glasgow, and out of Sharm el-Sheikh, we could be at 1.7 degrees by 2050 if we implement. So it says it can be done. That's only 0.2 of a degree off 1.5, which if we got the coal plants closing faster, if we shifted more rapidly to alternative sources of energy, if we began to exploit other available possibilities ranging from small nuclear reactor to the ammonia and green hydrogen, et cetera, we could move faster. One of the things I have seen, which reinforces in me this possibility of getting the job done, is the fact that there are things happening that never were measured by any of the modeling. For instance, electric vehicles right now, they've taken off in ways that nobody predicted. We hoped, but nobody predicted. And the modeling did not show the rate of transition taking place in the electric vehicle market today. If we were to accelerate the deployment of electric buses, we're working on an effort to do that with India now, some 12,000 buses. If we were able to accelerate the provision of some of the critical minerals that are necessary for the manufacturer, we're able to do more in the manufacturer, we could up our own deployment. President Biden set a goal that by 2035, our power sector will be carbon-free. Our automobile sector will be 100% electric new cars sold by 2035. That's the goal. Now, whether we can achieve it or not, I don't know. But in the effort to get there, we are seeing many things happening much faster than we anticipated, and they're proving that we still have that capacity for the unknown change to come to the table and carry us over the finish line. So I think we have to keep pushing. And the one thing I do know is, we are not doing what we know we could do and what is available to us now in technology to be able to do. We're not doing that as fast as we could.
Well, Secretary, our time is up, but can I just say thank you very much indeed. Your passion, your vision, your encouragement, your leadership is very, very clear to see. That was on display when you were over here at COP26, working with our climate change president, Alok Sharma. I know you've been working very, very closely with Prince Charles, as he then was. Of course, he can't be so vocal on these matters anymore, but also with David Attenborough. And you have been leading voices on something which is, as I stressed at the beginning, the biggest single challenge that the globe faces. But time is running out, and we do need to do more before global conditions escalate and the crisis is unfolding in slow motion, and we certainly need to do more about it, given the security implications that we've been studying here today. But on behalf of the committee, can I say thank you very much indeed for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's so much appreciated. Thank you to the staff, to my colleagues as well. That brings this committee hearing to a conclusion.